Welcome, 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 welcome. Our first cyber threat workshop of the year. That's right. This time on the slide, it says 2022, which we couldn't be happier about because, you know, they're all even numbers or some other reason. But 2022 is going to be a great year, primarily because we're going to be doing a lot of thematic things for the folks that attend these cyber threat workshops, and primarily centered around just taking this as our moment. You know, this is our moment to be courageous, to be candid, to be thorough, to be brave, to be fearless, and to go after adversary threat infrastructure as we continue to see it proliferating around the world. If you're new to our cyber threat workshops, welcome. If you're back for some more fun, welcome back. And we have today some interesting topics to get into, right, Benjamin? But I guess we'll give it just a sec for folks to pile in. But I know there's some interesting things you were putting together today, as well as with Mark. A lot of the automation and the ability to scale quickly when it comes to analytics and investigations. And I mean, we were only looking back at a few days of history, a few weeks of history, not even the whole gamut. But you're excited to get into this stuff today. I saw you yesterday, just giddy.
Yeah, I was. It's amazing when you see something in your investigation, your data, but then when you go look at it and it's like 7 million records, you're going, I can't go through this. But when you automate it, you can. And those are the things that you're going to be able to show. Mark and I will show those needles in the haystack that you can pull out from this large amount of data to be able to say, I found this pattern, but now let me see if it works if I apply it to this set that I would never touch by hand.
Exactly.
And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. And being able to actually touch and broaden your scope beyond what you thought was going to be possible in a given investigation allows you to, again, defend against the threat today and those yet to be deployed as a particular piece that we're going to get into in a moment. But real quick, that's sort of the what, folks. And the why, of course, is what I led with. We want you to be brave. We want you to be fearless because you can be. Knowledge is power. And to quote David Deutsch, as I'm sure many of you who are returning have heard me say, anything that is not prohibited by the laws of nature is achievable given the right knowledge. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to get knowledgeable and in doing so become fearless security professionals. But that's the what and the why we're here. Who are these people staring back at you on a camera? Benjamin, if you want to go ahead and we'll get started and make introductions. And
sure. I'm Benjamin Powell, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at RiskIQ at Microsoft. Been practitioner for half of my time, and the other half have been working creating security products. So I really want to make sure that the use cases that we come up with and we do are things that you're going to come across all the time. And a fun fact, I enjoy spearfishing. On the back of my wall, you might see some spear guns or spears hanging off the wall that I catch fish with. This was the latest one I caught in November off of La Jolla in San Diego. But when I tell people that, they don't want to take my emails. I only catch fish, not fishing for credentials and things like that.
But today we will be looking at the equivalent of a trunk full of harpoons, right? And
yes,
kits that we're going to get into. And by the way, that fish, that halibut there, he had it coming.
You know? Did. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, folks, a little bit of a different background. I'm Josh. I work with Benjamin very closely. We're like buddies. Some of the times on these workshops, you get a little bit of a Bert and Ernie feel, maybe like a Bob Ross, Mr. Rogers kind of feel sometimes too. You know, won't you be my neighbor? But my background's a little bit different, more academic. And some of the work that I've done has been around the economics of cyber criminality, trying to understand what are the motivating drivers and the underlying economics and the incentive structures that are driving criminal behavior online. And so a little bit different, was a practitioner years ago, but most of my cyber work has actually been in more of that academic setting and studying how threat actors behave and trade among each other. And then, of course, who else with us today?
Me.
Faces.
Hi.
It's not letting me. There we go. Sorry,
There
it wasn't letting me progress, and then it jumped too far. Here we go.
So if you guys are Bert and Ernie, I guess I would be Miss
Big
Piggy.
Bird.
Big Bird. Okay.
Everybody's favorite. Everybody's favorite.
Yeah,
That's,
Big Bird. There you
yeah.
go. So I have a totally different background. I have been in cybersecurity for 2 years, but marketing for 17 years with Kansas City Chiefs. So if you don't have a playoffs team, you can cheer for the Chiefs. I encourage it. And also Coca-Cola. And a little unknown fact, or maybe known fact, if you work at Microsoft or RiskIQ, I am also known for my voice. I sang the Star Spangled Banner for the Super Bowl parade that we won. The Chiefs won several years ago, and we're about to win again this year. And I also love Diet Coke. So you'll see me drinking it every now and then while we're on here. And last but not least, Mark.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with all of you and with my trusty cup of coffee. I have the privilege of working with this group every time that I can't avoid their ongoing request to join them in this fun little circus. And today is one such occasion. But in all reality, I love helping folks on the front lines fight evil. And I love helping folks do that at scale. And what that usually means is that working very closely with integrations, working with other tool sets that folks are using, taking the APIs that we have, APIs from other sources, and really merging that in together with their processes. I've got nearly 4 decades of over-engineering and breaking stuff, and then in between some of that, I also do a little bit of security engineering. I do a little bit of product management, a little bit of coding, and all things together. Fun fact for me, of course, I listen best on ports 43 and 53. Bonus points in there to see who. Oh, that's really cute. Somebody in chat said, "Oh, so that means Mark is the Cookie Monster." That's great. That's really great. Yeah, no, that's
Oscar
awesome.
the Grouch, either one.
Sometimes it is very much Oscar the Grouch. Yes, it really is. So anyway, really happy to be here with folks, and looking forward to sharing with you all of the lessons that we've learned in our collaborations, not only with people in the field, but also with our colleagues now at Microsoft. Great to be part of that. Great to be part of the CXE team. That's really where I'm sitting now. It's a team within Microsoft focused on helping our customers operationalize the tools that they have. And so really happy to be part of that and glad to be here with all of you.
Hey, and before we get to the next slide, sorry, Josh, just a little housekeeping. This is interactive, as you can tell, and it's live. So we would love for you guys to comment in the chat. That's where I'll be mostly living and conversing with you. Also Q&A, that goes to us privately. And then I think you can also just message the hosts and the panelists as well. So sorry, Josh, just wanted to cover that real quick.
And one other thing, this is being recorded. Sorry, Josh. It's being recorded, and the slides will be given out, and all of the notebooks that we do, we're going to make available after the workshop, so you can have them and play with them and get hands-on in them. Yeah,
sharing everything. The fact that you're here gives you rights to a 30-day extension and the lab environment gets converted into, hey, look at that, your own. So that's kind of nice. Going to share everything out. And yes, you can interact with us. This is live. And so that's some of the fun that we can have too, where things can stall out sometimes. But also it's a caution, which we'll have later, that the lawyers make us do, which is that we're working with real, live, genuine threat intelligence and threat infrastructure that's on the internet and live today. So also be careful. But this is live as of right now on January 20th, 2022. And so, and because it's live, thanks for being here. Somebody is going to get an American Express gift card today. Just saying thanks. Thanks for being a part of the community. Thanks for showing up. We're going to unmask and defeat some adversaries today. That's just what we do, all in a day's work. So thanks for being here. And we want to thank you again, as a token of appreciation.
And
Real
just to
quick.
remind everybody, so when you do get a phishing email offering a free Amex gift card from Benjamin, you'll want to make sure, like, is this from Benjamin or is it from Josh? Like, not sure what's happening here. So be careful.
Yes. And you ought to expect it, because we will announce who it is before the close of the day. Real quick, just so we can get an understanding of the room. Once upon a time, in a galaxy very close by, we did these in a physical setting. We'd come to a conference room. Yeah, once upon a time, people met each other in person, physically. Myth, it's not, I promise. But now that we're all virtual, we don't necessarily get like a raise of hands of, hey, who does this? And who's worked with intelligence for this long and that kind of thing, just to set the context of who's in the room. So you know who we are now. And we're just going to find out a little bit about you so we can gear those use cases to be very specific to your area. So right out of the gate, how long have you used threat intelligence? Just how much experience have you had with it? Or I guess, the first is, have you ever been here before? Is actually the first question. Have you ever been to one of our cyber threat workshops? Very easy question to answer, which is nice binary, true or false. And
so we have 39% first time. Oh, they have attended a workshop before, and 61, it's their first workshop.
And that's good for us. Yeah, that's good for us to know, because we'll have to slow some things down and say, hey, make sure you're logged on to here, and et cetera.
Yeah, we're going to have the lab environment all set up. We're going to take you through all of those guiding pieces. Question number 2, just what's your experience with threat intelligence? Again, just trying to understand certain concepts. We might even throw out, cliche, jargon such as SIGINT and OSINT and HUMINT. And what does all that mean? There's all manner of different terminology, as well as just what we're staring at when we're looking at intelligence and how to interpret it. What's the meaning inside of that intelligence? And so just trying to get a lay of the land here. Most people, it's less than the 5-year mark. And
we have 29% less than 2 years, 33% between 2 and 5 years, 27% more than 5 years, and 21% never.
So a pretty big even distribution here, actually, among those different buckets. But the majority still are in that less than 2 years, let's say. Because you have the never and then you have the less than 2. It's kind of the same thing, but in the terms of 2 or less. So when you add those together, okay. So we have again a good mixed group here. And then lastly, which ones do you care about? So what threats are most concerning to you? Now this one's been an interesting one, because over the years it's really fluctuated, but over the last several months there's been a distinct winner. But we'll just leave it out there, and you can choose multiples. You may have those various concerns, and so you're welcome to choose additional ones.
Before we show it, Mark, take a guess at the number 1 that we usually receive.
The number 1, well, it's missing what I would have thought, which is I'm running out of coffee. To me, that is the number 1 threat that I would be concerned with, right? But I would say in here right now, it's probably, I'm guessing it's probably ransomware.
Well,
you might be right.
Let's see if the streak continues. It has been the primary.
Ooh, we have 69% ransomware. So ransomware is the number 1. The number 2 is nation state threats.
Yeah.
And insider threats after that.
Yeah.
And then domestic crime, brand abuse, and hacktivists.
It's always interesting as things evolve when it comes to these questions, and we always have different people with whole different backgrounds. The first 2 questions, right? Have you been here before? Yeah. What's your background? But then you get to and you start to see things cluster when it comes to the things that we all care about. So that, again, thanks, because we just want to touch on these things that matter most to you and are relevant to your level of exposure to threat intelligence. And so thanks a lot for that. And without further ado, let's get into some of the material that this specific workshop will cover today.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to examine some phish kits. So recently there was a publication from RiskIQ and Microsoft where we talked about a Franken-phish kit. So websites were loading components from different places to build a phish kit, and those phish kits were being used to steal credentials from, Microsoft, Google, get into Adobe stuff and different email providers. So I looked at that from a perspective of where is that loading from? That's what we did in a previous workshop. But then I saw some interesting stuff, and we're going to go through and look at other things that are loading that are not malicious in nature. And if we track those, could we potentially find people that are creating these phish kits or where these phish kits are loaded from, to find the malicious places that maybe you don't know about, because that place where the malicious pieces were loaded from, that got moved, but they're still using the legitimate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the legitimate things that are being reused, like maybe some graphics or the endpoint where they're trying to get into Microsoft, for example, can I go backwards and find all the bad? And we're going to do that because we have the ability to scale it and find it. If you try to do it in the UI by yourself, you might find one or two. You're not going to find all of it. But with Mark's help over the past, he's taught me and showed me, and we've created some notebooks. And then I showed him my research and what I did. And he went, "Oh, wow, that's great. It's so sweet that you've come up to the novice level." And then he just blew it out of the park and took what I did and put it on steroids. And then he has the ability to integrate that with other types of data and with putting it into Sentinel. And so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to show how to do the investigation in the UI. Then we're going to show how to take those methodologies, the tips and tricks that you're learning how to do this type of analysis, and scale it. And once you've learned how to scale it, you can do it for any domain. I can go and say, let me look at this jQuery, the site. Let me go look for this a Microsoft site, this other thing. And I can now look at all of them and find the bad and then verify that they're really bad. And then take action upon it. Mark, do you have anything to say?
I would say the one thing to be mindful as we're going through on this is that always be thinking about the ways in which you look at this and you think, wow, this is great. We may not have time for this. Or, this is nice, but my boss is never going to let me do this. Or if I'm in a leadership role, I'm looking at this like, there's no way, like if I let my people do this, like they'll just go off in a hole somewhere and I'll never hear from them again. And we actually have some real work to do. Be mindful of those sort of objections as you're going through here and give us an opportunity to address them, because that's something that we're going to be talking about as we get further into this, that this actually is something that can be repeatable. It is something that can be made scalable across the team. It's something that can become an integral part of your workflow. And we're going to actually describe to you sort of the thought process that you would go through, the meta-analysis, because apparently meta is the new thing now, I guess. So we'll do some meta-analysis here, and we'll zoom back out a little bit and ask ourselves, all right, so this worked here at this level. Now how do I actually apply it? And that's the part that I'm excited about. So again, as we're going through on this, it's going to be fun, it's going to be entertaining, but we also think that there is actually an intersection with a practical context, and we'll be bringing that back down to earth for you at some point as we progress.
And work in more meta references.
Right.
Outstanding.
We'll choose our avatars at the end.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. No, but seriously, we won't get into that nearly as much. But I like the nod there, Mark. So there's really two sides to the whole RiskIQ thing. Now a part of Microsoft, and that is threat intelligence. All of those real world observations of what's happening on the internet. And by golly, the thing changes moment by moment. So you got to keep eyes on it. But understanding who's who and what's what's good, what's bad, what's threat, what's benign, who's an adversary, who's an ally. because we all swim around on the internet, and how are we colliding with one another, and what sort of harm or benevolent things like good third-party digital supply chain relationships are fantastic. Thank goodness for the internet.
Right.
There's also some traps out there. So just being able to distinguish what's really going on in the internet is a big part of that threat intelligence, and understanding where that malicious infrastructure is, regardless of who's operating it. And then the other side of that is, of course, that external attack surface. How do I appear on the internet? And what does it look like for others that are also on the internet? Again, good, bad, adversary, ally, yourself, and others. Being able to say, what is me? What is another? Is it good? Is it bad? Am I vulnerable? Am I exposed? Am I at risk? Am I threatened? Being able to understand that in the posture sense of how I exist on the internet is that external attack surface management side. But today, we're going to focus primarily on the threat intelligence, which comes with its certain challenges. Again, most of the time, look, entropy, the second law of thermodynamics reigns supreme, right? Everything in the world goes from order to disorder, no matter how well we try to organize it. So some things that happen in real life situations are just circumstantial. It just happens. Things fall apart. Things break. Bad things can happen, but good things take a little while to actually build and construct, and a lot of deliberate effort. So some things happen like digital transformation, but that creates a lot of attacker targets. They're all non-standard, and it becomes irregular in how we operate things. Strike one. Okay, that's a challenge, but we can overcome it. We can, again, be fearless in the face of that challenge. The second thing that becomes kind of difficult is that it can be challenging to know what really should matter, what actually matters most, what should be a priority, what matters to me. I mean, you can sift through 5,000, 10,000 intelligence articles, and not a one of them might matter to you when it comes to your digital footprint and what's happening where you could be threatened. So that's number two. Number three is actually being able to purpose that intelligence into some meaningful action, being able to enforce something, control something, factor it into a strategic plan, do something with the intelligence, being able to act on it. And sometimes that action may simply be the knowledge of it itself, or the strategic plan of what you're going to do given the intelligence observed. And then finally, the holy grail, the final pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that we're all seeking is defense at global scale, being able to actually maintain defense and not have to do nearly as much to realize greater protection. So is there a way to enable intelligence here and apply to all, or block from, in this case today, phish kit and any operator of it, that kind of thing, being able to fingerprint things and subsequently flex protection as the internet flexes and changes with who's on it and what they're doing. And so if we go to the next one, Benjamin, and this is just sort of like the quick rundown, and those two sides pair together in this world. You have yourself and all of that external attack surface management being informed by threat intelligence, and back the two go with one another. What is the case in external attack surface management? What are its threat implications on the intelligence side? And so we can go ahead and we're going to get to some really nifty labs today, so I don't want to bore you with all this. But one important thing, though, is the chronology, Benjamin. And I know a lot of people work with the framework of the kill chain, especially back when it was all the rage with Lockheed. And then, what MITRE has picked up and really expanded upon and done a good taxonomy of. But there's a chronology at play here in this chain. They're not just chained together in terms of sequence, but timing as well. And so if you want to go, I know this is a really close thing for you. What do you have to say about the kill chain and where we're going to focus today?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on how you can be more proactive and try to find these threats during the setup and weaponization phases. And if you can take them down at that point, you can potentially avoid the threat altogether. So, and you can make it so costly for the threat actor that they can't do it, and they'll be annoyed and they'll go away and they'll attack somebody else. But I want to go through and explain, we all play on the same battlefield, and the internet, there's the same laws that we all have to follow in order for it to work. And by understanding that the threat actor can't avoid the internet, And if we're monitoring the internet and we see it, we can find them, we can track them, and we can stop them. So if you think about like a typical like attack or phish, you might see that the initial connection where that person who comes on the internet to create, an attack, they're going to have an IP address, a net block, an ASN, an ISP. That information is going to be known. And then as they create the email, there's going to be an email provider, a subject, headers, attachments, timestamps, maybe even a language that they're using, a default language. And then when they send the email, it's going to go through transit IPs, transit net blocks, transit ASNs, transit times. You're going to see all that information. And then when it's received, there will be a read timestamp. There might be a read notification. There might be HTML that executes, that fingerprints that person and information that sends it back. There'll be host names. There'll be gateway IPs, where the location of where they were. And then when it's rendered, there could be like binaries that execute, dependencies. If they clicked on something, redirects. And then when it's compromised, then there'll be, their access IP, the net blocks, the access ASNs, the external actions that happen, unique strings that might be captured, and TTPs that you might see. So this whole chain of what happens, we're trying to stop it as the earliest as possible. So think of it like if you were defending a military base and people were coming and attacking you and coming to the gates and throwing bombs and trying to drive their cars in there and shooting at you at close range, if you could fly a drone out, several miles out and see them as they're approaching and identify them as something bad and eliminate them before they even get to the base, it's better for everybody. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to help you with that. Now, as we go through and we take a look at this, the way that RiskIQ does this is by going out and collecting information on the internet as a real user. So as a client, like how the client would actually see it. We do these web crawls with virtual users. We understand, pull in the JavaScript, the cookies, the passive DNS, the certificates. We understand the mobile apps that are on the app stores, what ports are open when we scan the internet, all the DNS records to find out the WHOIS information, social media, banners. And when that comes into here, we do about 250,000 new domain requests every day. We do about 2 billion web requests. So if somebody goes, well, I could do the same thing myself. Well, not at the scale that we're doing. We see on average over 300,000 new ports that are open. We have over 106 billion unique DNS records, and we have over 300 mobile apps stores that we're doing. We see over 34 million mobile apps. Now, as all this data comes in, the way that we process this and able to understand what's happening is there's an analysis phase. And in that analysis phase, we have data scientists, machine learning, security researchers, and threat intelligence people, okay? So think of it this way. If the security researcher finds out a new way to find a vulnerability and say, this vulnerability is bad, if it's on all these machines, we need to find it. We can tell our crawlers, go out there, grab that data, and let me know if you see this new thing, or if a patch comes out, how quickly that patch has been adopted. Or if there's a new type of attack, we can tell our data scientists about this and they can put it into production. And what happens is every single day, we have the new data that we collected and we merge it with the old data. So we can actually roll back something that we discovered today that might have existed for years and roll it forward and even create new data sets out of it. So for example, our host pairs was created after investigating Turla. And we found out that with the host pairs, we're able to identify a cookie and a host pair combination that was created, that we could figure out where these machines were in the world. And so then we created that data set and created it for everybody. So as these things come in, we have the host pairs that show the relationships of what's coming in and out. the whois data, the web components, what's running there, the trackers, little bits of code that you might use for determining how well your website's performing on the internet. But when someone duplicates your website, they might duplicate your cookies and your trackers. So by even examining your own cookies and trackers, you can find bad people that are impersonating you. And so as this comes in, we create even derived data sets to say, hey, this is a list of all the malware. This is a list where all the malware is running, all the accomplice lists, the scams, the IoT, reputation, dynamic reputation of based upon what an analyst would look at. Oh, this is a bad ASN. Oh, that we see a lot of bad traffic. Oh, we have a lot of hashes with it. It was involved in phishing and it's currently blocked. We can create a dynamic score and let you know what's happening. So with a single piece of malware, we know that, okay, that malware was on this IP and that IP had this cert, that cert was associated with this domain, that domain had another IP, another cert, there's some trackers, and we can build what we call an infrastructure chain to tell you the complete picture of that bad entity or threat actor and say, this is all the infrastructure involved. So you might have only known about one IP, but then we can tell you about all the other IPs and domains that are associated that you should also take action on. So when you think about the cyber kill chain, there's the deep and dark web area where there's discussion and planning. There's the open internet where you might have like recon, where they're scanning you, they're doing setup, they're duplicating your sites, they're putting their payloads in place, and then they do their attack. And then there's the delivery, the exploitation, the installation, and the command and control actions that take place. So RiskIQ is focusing primarily on outside of the firewall, on the open internet, looking at the deep and dark web and the open internet and letting you know what's happening prior to that occurring, so then you can take action. And we can usually see things 1 to 4 days before they're really live. So we can find them very early. And then with the Sentinel and Defender and M365, they're focusing on it when it gets in. When the information gets in, they take action, they see it, and that's on the inside part. So we're focusing on the outside. So if somebody's discussing doing an attack on the deep and dark web, in Illuminate, you can go through and search for your domain name, for example, and see the chatter that's happening. That's part of the things that are listed there. They might even talk about, does anybody have any compromised hosts in an environment? Because that will save them a lot of time and effort, and they can rent those or buy those. They might register a typo squatted domain, and they'll park the domain and get it ready. They'll make it email capable. They'll have an MX record associated with it, an SPF. It'll be under construction, and then maybe they start their phishing attack. So we can start looking, and you can say, well, if someone's doing a typo squatted domain, it's not, you can't take it down at that point, but once it has your images on there, that's domain infringement, and you can take action. Now, as things change over time, and if we look at an attack that maybe was stopped and then it comes back, we can actually see it, like when it goes to another IP address, or if the content has moved, we can find it and we can show it to you. We can show you what's occurring there. So I also wanted to mention that the same thing is true for the MITRE attack framework. And if you take a look at this, the initial, I have my little bar up here. Hold on one second. So the reconnaissance, the resource development, and the initial access, this is where we're playing. And a lot of the things that we're going to go through today and we're going to talk about will actually focus in on these different areas. But we handle a majority of these things here. Josh, do you have anything to add? Or Mark?
No, I was just going to, you had mentioned, if we get ahead of these things early on, then there's an opportunity to forestall or foreclose the opportunity for threat. And I want to focus on that opportunity one, because what we are observing when we look at threats is not only, again, we're all concerned, for example, nation state threats, not your typical spray and pray type of activity. Okay, that attack activity is typically highly targeted, typically daisy chaining together several 0 days, or going after significant exploits. And yet we're still seeing something else being added to the arsenal overall across all type of attacks, which is opportunism, right? Being able to put a malicious payload into an update of something that is widely distributed is an opportunism play. It is trying to go out there and just see if you can get any bites. And in so doing, get a toehold, and that's opportunism. And on that spectrum, we're seeing more and more of that. But that doesn't mean that there's an abandonment of the targeted variety. Right. That's still there, but opportunism is now right there along with it. So what we're seeing is that the threat actor doesn't necessarily have to choose one or the other. Am I going to be targeted or am I going to be opportunistic? They can be both. And with widely distributable and replicable threat weapons, they can do so in almost perfect anonymity. Given that we're not looking at them like we do. But the point just being there that if we can foreclose opportunity, then the cost of being opportunistic is just too difficult. And that's the only reason I was doing it anyway. It was just an opportunity. But if you can shut that down, then they do literally just get, you're a fisherman, go catch fish elsewhere. Right. Instead of getting the opportunity against yourself. So that's all I just wanted to mention. If you can push your threat protection outward toward the beginning of the kill chain, then you can foreclose the opportunity for opportunistic style attacks.
Right. And when you look at ransomware, there's the human operated, there's the opportunistic one that's kind of like bot type. Mm-hmm. And then also as a service where people will rent infrastructure to do their ransomware and phish campaigns to attack people.
Yeah, and we're in the first inning of that game. We're in the very beginning of the maliciousness as a service. Yeah. We're all filled with the as out there, and SAS and IaaS and IDaaS and PaaS and all the different as's. Like we're just in the very beginning stage of maliciousness as a service. Sorry, Mark, I cut you off. You're about to say something.
No, you're good. The MITRE attack framework is especially interesting when you look at some of the mitigations in the reconnaissance phase. Frankly, it can be kind of like a cup of decaf coffee in the morning, right? You look at it and you read the mitigations for one of these. It says this technique cannot be easily mitigated with preventative controls since it's based on behaviors performed outside the scope of enterprise defenses and controls. Well, that's depressing, right? And there's a whole set of things that go on in that reconnaissance phase where typically the defenders have had to just sort of take a passive role and just, hope that the phishing education emails worked and that the CFO isn't feeling especially click happy today, right? And what we're talking about today is an opportunity to recalibrate that. It's an opportunity to re-engage at that phase as defenders and to do so in ways that are scalable. And that's what I'm especially excited about and really encourage folks as you kind of start diving into this framework, and there's maybe some pieces in there where you're like, we can't really do anything about it. We say otherwise. And that's largely what we're going to be talking about here today.
Yeah. So back in 2007, I helped found a SIM company. It's now the 40 SIM. And at the time when you would find an incident that's coming in from the outside, you set up an alert or a rule to say, let me know if this IP comes back. But the threat actor never comes back with that same IP. So it's always a different IP coming in. But then with RiskIQ, we now have that ability to see that entire infrastructure chain and see all the possibilities of where that person's coming from. So we're going to do the same thing when it comes together for the phish kits to find all the pieces that are involved and analyze all those different components and then take that information and move forward and find all the other kits that might be leveraging similar components.
Yeah, and so real quick, folks, that was the primer. As we had mentioned earlier, more than 60% of you that are here today, it's your first workshop. So that's the context in which we're operating here. Not as much of looking at a payload on a particular endpoint and seeing exactly how it behaves in a sandbox kind of environment, but something a little bit different in the sense of going on the offense, in the sense of being the initiator of what is going on out there in the internet in those pre-attack phases, and how can I shield myself against it in an adaptive way. So these workshops really center around that and And now's the good part. Now we get into the lab environment and do it ourselves. So you want to take folks through that, Benjamin, on how to get
so
in?
we have 2 slides, Josh, that talk about like how we're integrating with inside of Microsoft. Do you want to take these 2 slides and then we jump right in?
Knowledge in product. There it is. I mean, that's the short of it. Being able to take awareness of that external attack surface and inform the product that's doing the analytics itself. Security analytics, SIN, all the different things that we talk about when it comes to Microsoft Sentinel, being able to inform it with independent real-world observations of the global attack surface. Secondly, the next one over is being able to take what can be identified as malicious in that internet identifying process and informing threat intelligence in the same way. That way we can have applicable controls that actually matter, adapt, and defend against things as they arise on the internet. Because that's where we live, that's where we operate, that's where everyone goes to hang out. It is the metaverse. So considering that's where we're going to be living over the next few hundred years, it might as well become a safe place. So let's find the problem spots. Let's reconceptualize security instead of a firefight. Maybe just putting it out there as a thought. Maybe instead think of yourself as a safety engineer when it comes to orchestrating the right controls, the right ramps, the right rails that needs to happen so that you can facilitate what the organization's actually trying to do and do it in such a safe way that they can get their thing done in the most benign ways possible, in the most accelerating way possible, because you're not getting really crippled by any of the threats that are out there. And that's really what the threat intelligence side is meant to be. So that's it. Really. Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the lab. So today we're going to be using a credential that is that we're all going to be using today, so we can get into different aspects. I want to make sure that everyone was on the same view of what we're doing. If we're going to get into any third parties or your own attack surface questions, I wanted everybody to see their own. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop the slideshow, and I'm going to copy and paste these into the chat so everyone has them. And then I'm going to show you how we use those. So give me a quick
Make sure you select everyone.
I'm doing that now. Thank you, Josh.
Okay. Sometimes Benjamin just sends it to me and I'm already in. So.
That's right. So
just in case they don't know, you go to community.riskiq.com, and that's where you'll type in this account name.
I'm typing these in right now. So we're going to be logging in through the 2 tools that we're going to be using today. Is we're going to use RiskIQ, so community.riskiq.com, and URL scan.io we're going to be using today. Okay, and give me 1 second.
And those are in there now. And again, this is all going to be shared out later, so you can be able to recall what those different tools and instruments were. Very quickly, lawyers rule the world. It is what it is. We're operating with real world threat intelligence. We're going to bump into things that are malicious in nature. The very character and nature of them is malicious. You'll even see that with a reputation score plastered on it. As such, we try to mitigate that with just being professionals and being responsible. We're all security pros here. We get that we need to operate by certain standards and have buffers and so on. So use your best judgment and just realize you are operating with and touching real threat infrastructure. So use your best judgment and let's all be safe out there. But now you've been disclaimed.
Perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up my slides, and we're going to get right in. Give me a quick second. I'm going to open up my main one, and we'll see the same thing. Okay, so raise your hand if you're having issues logging in, so then we can help you get logged in. So I'll give everybody a second, and then we'll start. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see my screen a little bit bigger. Okay, and this is the main screen that once you log into Illuminate, this is what you see. This is the threat intel portal. So if I search for a word, a phrase, a name, a domain, an email address, whatever it is, it will go look for that across all of the open source threat intelligence we have in there from multiple sources, even our own, and give you information. We're going to focus, if you take it for picture, if you take a look at this section right here, this last little dot, we're going to look at this vagabond fish kit, okay, article. And I'm going to paste this in so you can get to it directly if you need to. And in this article that was published in November, we talked about how these fish kits were being leveraged, but they're using components that are the same. And if you go to the very bottom of this article, there's referencing a Microsoft Franken-Phish, okay? And if you click on that, okay, I'm gonna put this in here, okay? In this article, it was pretty cool. I found something that was very unique. And I talked about this in a previous workshop, okay? So inside of here, if you zoom into the image, there was a section in here where it talked about these two different fish kits that are linking and pulling in the same components, okay? And it was this Dance Vita website where it's pulling in this component. And I thought that was really novel. And I go, okay, can I find the bad guys by looking at who is pulling in this image? So what other websites in the world are linking and having people pull in this fish kit component, okay? And inside of RiskIQ, we're able to go through, and I'm going to paste this into everybody, and I'm going to go back. I'm just going to copy this, and we'll start from here, and I'll walk you through. So from inside of here, if I went to dancevita.com, it gives me some information. The reputation score, there's some information here. Here's that deep and dark web information that we talked about, and there's 15 more that are listed here. What we're going to do is we're going to click on this little arrow to the right of it, and this is going to take us into the advanced search. And from here, this is where the magic will happen, and we'll go through and we'll explain what's happening. So right across the top is our reputation score. So the reputation score is based upon rules that have fired. It could be because articles were created, because we saw some previous bad activity, something was blocked. We give you a score from 0 to 100. And at a 68, we're at a suspicious score. It doesn't say it's confirmed malicious, but it's suspicious. It's most likely malicious. So we can see that this ASN is more likely to be malicious because we saw a lot of other things there. The registrar is probably like a free or cheap registrar service where we might see a lot of threat actors going there. And this resolving IP address, we've seen activity on. Now, this other section, the analyst insights, are things that might say, hey, there was a new subdomain added. The IP address just changed. The domain has only been up for less than 30 days. So there's some questions in there. So this will give you some other things that you can look at. Now, this heat map is 6 months worth of data, all in a visual view. And the number represents the number of unique IP addresses we saw on that day. And on the legend here, we have routable. I'm just going to expand this over a little bit. Sorry, I didn't maximize it out. Routable, which is blue, routable and non-routable, and non-routable. And people are thinking, how would you ever see a non-routable IP address on the internet? It's not supposed to happen. Why would you see that? Mm-hmm. Well, when we go and look at like the register information, it might say, hey, that domain is on this name server. We'll go to the name server, we'll pull all the records. And when we do that, we'll see records that are either routable or non-routable. It might be, hey, this domain is set to a loopback address, a 127.0.0.1. So a threat actor might be staging something and it's in the name server ready to go. And then they give it the real IP address, a public IP, and they do their attack and they turn it back up. So we're able to see that type of transition. So if you take a look at this map, I can go to any day in here and filter the results and see that IP address, but you can see it's been the same forever. But I can also filter to say, click on one IP, and then hold the shift key and click on another one to filter those results if there's a lot of data during that time. Also, down below is all of the data that we've seen going back all the way to 2010. So I can go back to the very beginning, click on it, and see how it looked back in time. Okay, so I can go back and forth and look at different 6 months windows of time and see that. And I can either reset it by just resetting my browser, or I can click on the far right. I'm just going to reset the browser, and then we'll move on.
You know, one of those things over time that changes that, you know, I know we're going to get into some of the tabs, but are the host pairs. You know, as things interact with one another on the internet. Can you just describe to the folks here? We do have a lot of new folks, like what host pairs are, because we're going to use those. Those are going to be a strong indicator of mapping certain things from bad to good and good to bad today. Can you describe host pairs with folks that might be new to the concept here?
So think of it this way: when you go to a website and you're at your computer and you're in a browser, that website isn't just sending you everything itself. It might say, hey, I want you to grab this Google Analytics. I want you to take information from the client and send it to Google for analytics. I want you to take this image that's over in Facebook and bring that down. I want you to load up this special type of font that we like, and then you're going to grab that font from this company over here. So all of those components that get brought in to render and create your page, that's what host pairs are. So what happens is if we go to a website, we know because we're acting as the client, what's being loaded in and what's being sent out. So the child-parent relationship. So for example, if you're a parent, you can go to your child and say, give me that toy and you can take it. And your parents could probably come to you and say, hey, give me your car keys, give me and take them. So like there's this parent-child relationship. The child is the parents going into the child and doing something. So if we take a look at this domain, Office 365 document.tk, is going to DanceVita child, dancevita.com child, and there's a link. And so it's pulling that back. So if we went into my slide, if we went back to this image here, we can see here dancevita.com/css/app.css. So it's bringing in this style sheet, it's linking to this, and it's bringing this back. It's actually, this is what's coming back. So this is what's being loaded. So the bad site, that Office 365 .tk, what's happening is it has all the code to say when the client downloads it, grab this from here, and it puts it together. It's not really a big website, but it pulls everything in to render it dynamically for the client. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's just it. Just wanted to know what it is that we're working with here, because it's going to come into play big time today.
Right. So
briefly, one thing to keep in mind, folks, as you're looking at this, the cause is really important in here. So understanding, like, you know, the parent-child relationship is really a function of the cause, and it really does. What we're trying to do is distill down what we're seeing in the DOM. We're actually trying to put that into that kind of that tuple of a relationship there. So keep in mind always the cause of those relationships. That helps give you an idea of that, and then the parent-child is sort of the direction of that cause. And in this case here, it has to do with the providing of resources, right, from one thing to another. And at a high level, one of the things that's really interesting is that typically as defenders, as researchers in all of this, we're looking for commonalities, right? We're looking for ways of sort of tying things together. In the past, maybe we used just attributes purely of domains or purely of IP addresses. That worked for a little while, especially around whois records and so on. But it had some risk involved with it. What you're going to see here is a way of surfacing connections via the host pairs, via the relationships on the sites, that is actually more durable than what we would find in the whois record, and in some cases more definitive. And that's really what you're going to find as this begins to open up.
Yeah, and I'm loading up something on my side. I have all of these bookmarks in here as well. So I will send you these first ones right now, so you can see them. So you can just click on them. So let's walk through it. So I have this Office 365.tk, and there's two different ways that you can pivot and see the additional data. I like to open it up in another tab. So if I click on it, it takes me there directly. I'll do that. I'll show you. So it takes me there directly, but I don't want to go that way. I'm going to hit the back button. When I do my investigations, I like to right click and open another tab. And the reason for that is I have all my tabs here, and I can go into Chrome and say, or Edge and say, save all my tabs into a folder. And then that preserves my investigation, and I can go back at any time. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm opening this up in another tab now. So if we open up this Office 365 document.tk, we can see that it's only been up for a few days. Okay. The name server is most likely to be malicious from the infrastructure. The TLD is a .tk. It's a free TLD. So a lot of bad people use them. So let's go through now and look at the host pairs here. So if we take a look at the host pairs, you're going to start to see something unusual. So the first one that we see is an aadcdn.msauth.net. There's a login cdn msauth.net, aacdn msauth, and you can see the first and last time that we saw these. So that tells you, as we go through and we crawl the internet, every time we crawl it again, we mark it, is it the same or is it different? If it's blank, it means if ever the last day is blank, that means it's currently that way right now, and it hasn't changed. So this is how we can tell, for example, if somebody patches something. If we're looking at components and we see, hey, that component was on this date, but the last date was on this one, we know when they upgraded, when they changed. But as we go through, I'm looking right here, I see this sustainableinfrastructure.org. Mm-hmm. I've heard of that website before. Josh, have you heard of this website before?
I have.
You have. So the crazy thing is I started to see some infrastructure in here, and like you always see this Bootstrap CDN, mm-hmm. Google APIs.com, there's jQuery.com. So I started seeing all these things, and I had an idea. I said, hey, let me map this out. I want to go through, and I'm gonna use a graphing software called Maltego. And let me go through and let me look at this so I can get a visual representation of how these are linking together and the relationships of what's going in and out of these websites. So if you take a look at this top one right here, this is dansvita.com. Okay. This right here is a sustainableinfrastructure.org. Okay. Now, down below here, all of these are the Microsoft like authentication areas, like how you do single sign-on or get into the different areas. This is a way that these are legitimate. So these are legitimate, okay? This is legitimate, okay? Now, this is where that Office 365 document.tk lives, in this middle area, okay? Mm-hmm. And then down below here, these are also legitimate. There's the jQuery.com, the bootstrapcdn.com. And then as I went through, I saw that there was two different attacks going on. One was to the LDS church, okay? And this other one, this tech campus, okay? But they're linking back to this DigitalOcean spaces.com. And if you notice here, this AMS3, this is this tech campus com.ams3. And on the DigitalOceans, there was similar namespace that we're seeing here that these things were linking to. So I wanted to go through and say, I need to find out more about the sustainableinfrastructure.org, okay? And what's being loaded from here? You know, what's happening here? Let's go and do that investigation, okay? So if we take a look from here, if you right click and you open that in another tab now, you're going to get to this spot right here. So let me, we're going to get here. Okay. And if we look at the sustainableinfrastructure.org, you'll start to see all these host pairs. But I wanted to find out who they were. So I actually went out and did a Google search and said, what is this? And this is a legitimate site that's Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. They're doing green projects all over the world. They're doing wind farms, solar, all this stuff. And I'm like, are they behind this? What's happening? What are they doing? Are they trying to raise money by doing phishing campaigns to steal credentials? It was kind of like, I'm going, why would they be involved in this? Okay. Now, the crazy thing that I found out was, if we look at the host pairs for the sustainableinfrastructure.org, I see Office 365 document.tk, but that was also on the Dance Vita. If I go back to Dance Vita, and we look at the host pairs, it's the same. So the list of the bad stuff was the same on the sustainable infrastructure.org. So I said, okay, how can I find the data to find out what's really being loaded, so I can figure out, are they infected? Do they have part of the phish kit that's being loaded? Are they involved in this? Are they behind this? I wanted to get more information. So a way that I could do it is I can come out and I can go to URL scan.io. Okay. So I'll show you how this works. So I'm just going to grab the domain. Okay. Going to grab the domain. And for URL scan.io, whenever you're doing an investigation, you want to have an air gap between you and what you're doing the investigation on. And the reason for that is you don't want them to tip them off. And the second one is you don't want to be infected by anything. Okay. So I am always using a tool like RiskIQ that has already collected the data and examining it. Or if I'm going to say, who is this organization? I go like to Google or to Bing and I do a search and say, tell me more about it, because I'm not going there directly. I'm going to a third party. And so when I did that search, I had quotes around it to tell me about it. So it brought up the information about that domain. Okay. So if I go to the search field here and I can paste this in, I can see if anybody else has submitted one in the past. And there was one a day ago. Okay. So when I went through this, when I selected it, it shows me an image of that website. So this is key, because when you're looking at phishing attacks or things like that, you want to look at that page, but you don't want to execute it because there might be some malicious code that might do an exploit on your machine. So I want to be able to have that air gap and to be mindful that you don't want to bring an infection to your machine, to your house, to your organization, or to a customer. You want to use different tools. We have the same data. It's in our backend, but it's not in this UI. So I can't show you with inside of Illuminate, but we have this data. So I went through and I examined this, and there was nothing suspicious at all. Everything was good. There was nothing bad. So then what I did was I said, let me take a look at one of the bad sites. So remember, the first one listed here was this office document.tk. So if I go back and I say, okay, let's search for this. So I'm going to go back to search. I'm going to paste this in. And once I do that and I hit search, we're going to see that there are two things that show up. Okay, one 2 years ago and one a day ago. So I'm going to click on this one. So now that I click on this one, I get an image and it says, hey, this is malicious. Okay. And I get the image. It says, because you're accessing sensitive information, you need to verify your account. So this is the credential harvesting that this phish kit is doing. Okay. So now I want to find out where that sustainable infrastructure stuff is coming from. Okay. And there's a couple ways I can do it. I can come into here and see, hey, is there anything that shows sustainable infrastructure in here? Any of the domain names? And I don't see that. It's been, this has been suspended. This page has been suspended, so you can't get there anymore. But I can go to what's called the document object model, the DOM, okay? And so this is what happens. So when you go visit the site, this DOM comes down to your machine and your machine starts building this. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this, okay? And up here is that Dance Vita piece that we talked about, okay? And I did a search and I found that in this section right here, it started to load this waiting GIF, okay? So what the bad guy's doing, he's loading up this waiting GIF from this legitimate website that's out there in the world. And I checked this and don't go do this, but I've already made sure that this was okay. Let me show you. So if I open this up in another window, it's running this little spinning GIF. So when you get to that phish kit and it says, hey, put in your credentials, this little spinning wheel's going, saying like it's going to time out to encourage you to do it fast and put your credentials in there. Okay. So I went, oh my goodness. I go, okay, so they're loading this GIF from this legitimate site, and that's why it looks the same as it does for the Dance Vita, because both are loading something that are bad. Okay. So I went back and I said, okay, if that's the case, it doesn't show me a lot, because maybe they're not loading the GIF all the time from here. They're not putting that in the kit. And maybe the link to where like the bad stuff was held, like at Dance Vita, has moved to another place. So I might not find all that current infrastructure. So if I went back to the Office 365 document.tk and look at those host pairs, I wanted to look to see what other things were loading. And I said, if I could go look at this good thing that's loading, which was the sustainableinfrastructure.org, that spinning GIF, could I do the same for others, for like something else like this AAD CDN Microsoft.net? Could I do it for that? And if we open this up in another tab and we take a look at this and we look at the host pairs, oops, I minimized it. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the host pairs. There's 229,000 results. So
I got 292.
292,000. Yeah, 292,000. So at this point, as you might go, hey, okay, dead end. I'm never going to find the needles in the haystack. And that's where your investigation would stop. Okay. So I wanted to now take the knowledge of what I learned using the UI and create a Jupyter Notebook to go through and figure out what's there. And so I'll walk through and show you like, so if we take a look at, there was another one in here, this in the list that was an accountingglitchme.com. So I went through and looked for those as well and found the same images. So there's some different ones in here. Okay. There was another one that I found, which was the Microsoft one. And there was other ones that were in here as well, like the LDS Church. So I found that LDS Church one listed. And then based upon that one, I looked at it to see what it was. And it says, hey, this has been taken offline. But if I look through, I could find others that was linking, that LDS was linking to this. And here's another screenshot for it. So when we go through and we take a look at this now, we found that it was loading the phish kit from resources from Dance Vita. It's loading the image GIF from here. Okay, and here's a little spinning GIF that we see. Now, I want to find the phish kits, and we've noticed that both of them had the same information in there. Okay, so now I want to focus on the bottom part that we talked about earlier in the map, which is this is the end place that they want to go. So no matter where they change where it's starting from, they're always going to the same endpoint. Okay. So Mark and I were talking yesterday. He had a great analogy. Think of it this way. Let's say that there's a bad guy and he likes a very particular, unique type of wine. and you tell all the distributors, hey, I want to find out who's buying this wine. And you start finding, and you find that there's many restaurants that have it, but then you find a couple places, homes or something, that are also getting this wine. So now, if you can look it through that big list of addresses, you can filter out all the good stuff, and then you can focus in on the ones that are unknown or suspicious or known to be bad out of that list. And that's what we're going to do in the notebook. Okay. So we have over 292,000 items that we want to go through, and we're going to look at it through a Jupyter Notebook. Any questions so far on what we've done?
Sorry, I've been like actually doing some poking around as we're going through it, doing the labs myself. Jackie, any questions that have come through? I haven't seen too many just yet, but I haven't been looking either.
Yeah, there's a few in the Q&A that I'm just directing to either you or Mark at this point. But I wanted to point out a best practice for those of you that haven't used RiskIQ, community at riskiq.com. Benjamin, you open new tabs each time, right?
Correct.
And why do you do that? Just
well, I mentioned that because I mentioned that earlier, but I do that because at the very end, I can say, go to bookmarks, save all tabs, and put them into a folder. Yeah. And that whole path of where I went has been preserved, because sometimes you'll think of yourself like on a tree, on the trunk of the tree, and you go down a branch and it dead ends and it's done. Mm-hmm. So you have to go back to the main trunk and go down a different branch. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like to do the tab method.
Yeah, because I've noticed I've gotten like 5 steps down, and then I'm like, wait, I wanted to look at that other thing, and I got to go back, and it's like,
and then you lose where you were before, and so that's why I like to do it that way. And I just have like a whole bunch of tabs, and then I save them, and then if anything happens and I close out my browser by accident, I can go back in and open them back up, and I have them. Yeah.
One question that was posted that I just want to really address here, because it is a little bit confusing kind of what's happening. Folks were saying, well, hold on, like, did these attackers like somehow compromise the sustainable infrastructure site in order to gain access to this? No, they don't, right? All they did is they just reused an image that's there. And this is a very common thing, right? You're going to have images all over creation. If you're using jQuery on your site, you're going to pull it down from a jQuery CDN. This is a very common and ordinary practice. It just so happens that in this particular case, instead of downloading that sustainable spinner from that site, they just decided, well, we're just going to link out to it. It does make me sort of postulate that maybe that was their first target, right? Maybe that was their first attack. Maybe they were first going after a phishing attack there. They wanted to use some UI elements of their site. So I tend to think there might be somewhat of a correlation, a nexus there as maybe their initial attack vector. But in any case, they're just copying and pasting these things. And so it becomes, the key point is it's not that that site's been compromised. It's that we now have a piece of commonality that we can expect to see and surface when we're doing our investigations in here.
So one of the things I'm in right now is this is Jupyter Notebook, and it has the passivetotal.analyzer. I have that set up in my machine. So it's using our API, and Mark wrote the analyzer piece based upon like all the things that we ever did in the past. We go, oh, I got too much data back. This doesn't tell me this. I only want a short period of amount of data. How can we do this? So he wrote this tool that's amazing, and that's why I wanted Mark on here to talk about this. But what I'm doing here is I'm telling it to bring me back 10,000 rows max. I want to go back 7 days out of those 292,000 records, going back to the beginning of time that we have. I only want 7 days worth. Grab the host pairs. And so you can see right here, it grabbed all the information, like the cause, the first and last scene, the parent, the child. It has all that information in here. And then this is as a data frame, so it kind of looks a lot nicer. And that's what you see in this section here is that data frame. Oops. And I double clicked on it and it disappeared. What happened? There it is. There it goes. There's the data frame. But now what I want to do is I'm going to filter and focus on the causes. So that's what this is doing. And these are all the different causes that we have here. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see this. And I'm going to maximize my window so we can use as much of the real estate as possible. Okay, so there's a CSS import, which means somebody's copying your, that's like the way that they're going to copy their website. So that's a red flag right there. I have images, I have initiator, parser, script. They're doing a script, there's a redirect, there's an XML HTTP request. And what we're going to focus on are the images. Somebody's pulling the images from the Microsoft login. And let's take a look at that. So I had a little whitelist in here. I said, don't show me the real login.microsoftonline.com. So here they all are. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to focus these. I'm going to say anything from .gov, don't show me. And this is going to now filter to show me these different ones that are just images in here. So the next thing to do is to come through and say, I want to figure out of these ones that are the images, can you give me the reputation for these? And you'll notice now that when I do this, you'll see this. This is the domain names, the host names. Okay. And here's just a list of them. So I can take these, I can take action. I can do something with them in another tool. I can put them into a watch list, create alerts from it. But now I'm going through and it's telling me for every one of those parents, it's going through and figuring out all of the issues with the reputation. Is it malicious? Is it suspicious? Is it neutral? Is it good? Or is it unknown? And I'm writing this right now live. I have a bunch of stuff going, but I have another one up here. So
actually, while that's running, let me answer one of the questions that have come up in here. There was actually a couple of them. One of them was, is it possible to integrate this with a SIM? Absolutely.
Yes.
And what Ben just said right there is key, right? We're looking over just the last 7 days. We filtered out some hosts that we know are likely legitimate pairings. And we've now surfaced this other list of hosts in here, combined with what he is doing now and enriching them further by looking at reputation score. You've got a nice finite list of hosts that you can use to bring into your watch lists and maybe put into your defensive posture. So imagine, like initially we were at 265,000, right? Now we've got a few hundred. This is actionable. This is exactly how you come down to the point where you are surfacing your own threat intelligence, right? Folks often come to us and say, hey, we just need your list of bad things. We're like, well, hold on, let me get you a pipe to the internet. Like, okay, it's not really that bad, right? But it's a bit of it's going to be a little bit of data, right? And listen, if you're using feeds and if that's part of your threat intelligence, absolutely, that's a normal part, and you should. But you should also be looking for opportunities to surface your own threat intelligence. And if you kind of follow the arc of what's happened here, there was, to kind of bring the whole story together, there was maybe a phishing attack that came into an organization. We went looking on it, found a connection to this sort of legit site, and then discovered that there's actually a lot of others that have that same connection. And so we really crafted this and said, you know what, if they were attacking me once, then they're probably going to attack me again, and they're probably going to use the same phishing kit, and they're therefore probably going to reuse that same link out to the sustainable spinner out there. So, hey, you know what, let's just start setting up some alerts, let's start doing some proactive blocking, and let's start proactively looking for all these pairings, because they're very likely going to come back into us. One of the other questions that was there was, well, how did I know that sustainable spinner GIF was malicious? Well, you didn't. You started with a single site that was using that resource. So it's really not that resource, that spinning GIF, was malicious. It's that became the nexus by which we discovered intersections with all of this other stuff. And wow, Benjamin, looks like you've got some topaz quasar brownies going on in here.
I do, right here. So
I'm not sure that geranium there is so harmless. That grape harmless geranium.glitch.me, I'm not sure that's going to be very harmless.
So what was happening is, think of it this way. if we haven't talked to the website, and got a lot of information, then we might not know if it is bad or not. Okay. So generally what I'll do is, like, for some of these, I'll say, okay, where was that glitch me? Oh, here's one. Let's try this. So I'm going to come out and do URL scan IO, and I'll go to search and say, tell me if anybody has gone to this one. They haven't. So I'll go to home and I'll tell it to do a public scan, and I'll go back to the list and we'll see if we can find another one. Let me see if another one.
And while that's scanning, so folks, one thing that's going on here, and this is happening both with the glitch.me stuff as well as some of the DigitalOcean spaces and a few others. If there is one rule about the internet, it is that if you offer something for free, folks are going to find a way to abuse it for malicious ends. And these sites, nothing wrong at all with what they're doing, and in many ways they're maybe being a little naive in a way that I wish that the internet worked. I wish that it would be that glitch.me was this great little place that I could go and could discover some really cool apps and collaborate with folks and maybe do some joint app developments and use this to quickly publish the ideas that I have. And it is all of those things. But because there's not really an active effort to maybe police who's signing up for it, because there's not really a dollar amount involved with it, pretty much anybody can set up a presumably harmless geranium on this site, and the result is that they now have this hosting space. And again, if we were just looking at domain ownership data, even if we were just looking at web hosting ASN data and so on, that would not be enough, because it would just bring us back to the legitimate infrastructure of glitch.me. We have to understand what all of these interactions are and where the resources are pulling in from. And that's really what the host pairs perspective is giving us, especially when coupled in together with our reputation score, which essentially what the reputation score is doing is it's kind of like Ben Powell in a box, right? That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to take all of these pathways that he's gone down and look at this perspective that we have across the internet, distill that into a score, and put it in here directly. Do you find anything interesting there, Ben, or do I need to keep blathering on?
So no, I found one. So I went to the list, I grabbed one. Here's one that was Office 365 verification. And then there's this one that I just put in, which was an unknown on our side. So, but it's malicious. Okay. So the one thing that I'll go through, and I was showing this to Mark. I say, yeah, so all of these, I want to see the image. I want to be able to see that, oh yeah, this is bad. We might have not known about it, but maybe somebody received a phishing email, went and put it into URL scan IO and said, check this domain. Is it okay or not? So I wanted to combine those two things together to say, let's make our intelligence even better by bringing in some other information and merging those together. And so I asked Mark about that, and that's what he's going to be showing in a minute. But I wanted to go through here, so I dropped out all these malicious subdomains and then all the domains to see, hey, are these known good or bad? And then went through and tried to figure out the registration to see how long have these domains been online. And we've always heard if the domain has been less than 30 days, you should be cautious. Maybe don't allow people to go there. But because these domains are free or very inexpensive to use, the threat actors are leveraging them, and they've been around for years. So that is bypassing your controls, because it goes, how long has this domain been online? Well, that domain has been on for 570 days. Okay, then it can come in. So I wanted you to see this, that you might need to think other ways of doing it. And so when we go through and we start looking at all these other ones that are here, here's all the glitch me ones that you see. There's tons in here, and they have these are ones that I would want to go through and look at programmatically to get them. And you can even have it create a score to say, hey, 75, the 75th percentile of all these are malicious. Okay. And as I went through, I said, okay, now let me look at some of these and start breaking them down to see what the host pairs for these relationships were. And so when we go through, you can see here it's loading the script, some images, and here's getting that link ref, href here. And this one, this digital oceans, there's a lot of stuff being loaded in here. A lot of things that are happening, okay? And then here's another digital ocean, very similar infrastructure. So at this point, this is where I showed it to Mark, and I said, Mark, look how great this is. And he laughed at me, and he goes, "You're like a young child, like let me show you what you can really do with this." And I'm going to turn this over to Mark, because now we got to a point where I can look at those 292,000 host pairs and find the 155 that are bad or suspicious or unknown that I can take action on and quickly look at those. And Mark goes, "Well, you don't need to go out there directly. URL Scan.io has an API, and let me show you what I can do." And so, Mark, I'm going to stop sharing.
Certainly.
And I'll let you share, and we'll go from here.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that's really been interesting, we've had some sessions before where we've talked extensively about notebooks, and I'm going to probably, as we go through this, I'm going to show you some, sorry, let me argue with my windows here a little bit there. Where'd all you guys go? I want to see your big, oh, there you are right there. Okay. I think the one thing to remember when you look at the notebooks that we have running in here, Ben, you've clearly been a long-time Python programmer, right? You, by all accounts, really?
No. So this
really?
I've used Python. Like, I can take someone's Python code and make some slight modifications and changes to make it do what I want, but I'm not a Python programmer at all.
Right. And yet, look what he created in there. And that's one thing I really want to emphasize, is that notebook there that Benjamin had, I wasn't involved in helping him create that notebook that you're looking at. Certainly, I worked on the core library behind it, and certainly I created some example code and so on. But he was able to take that and really run with it. And this, to me, is the basis of this hypothesis, if you will, that I'm putting out here of analysis as code. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to kind of zoom back out and then zoom back in. And the whole, forest to trees thing or whatever, Ben's been looking at pine cones. Now I'm going to go back out and look at the forest, and we'll come back down and look a little bit more detail into this. But the key point is that I want to underscore is that what Benjamin was doing there in the notebooks is approachable. This is something that all of you folks can be doing, and I would really begin to argue, challenge you maybe, if I can do this respectfully, that you should be doing so. So let me talk about this a little bit. So I don't know if you folks have ever heard of this notion of infrastructure as code. It's this idea that has emerged from modern DevOps, meaning developer operations, that, hey, you know what, instead of spinning up servers and going in and describing like how this whole server is going to be set up, what we should do is we should just write some kind of code that declares to us what the infrastructure is that we want. And if I take a look at this, like this is an ARM template, I don't really know for sure what it is that it's doing, but I can kind of figure out in here. It looks like it's going to spin up a server farm. Seems like it's dependent on some parameters that are involved in here. Seems like it's dependent on some kind of an API version. So this is a piece of code that would spin up some infrastructure inside of Azure. So infrastructure as a code has emerged because the folks in DevOps have recognized that it's simply not scalable, meaning it's not something that we can do at a repeatable high volume level to be able to spin up the various servers and infrastructure that we need. And also, like, if you just look at a configuration of a server, how are you ever going to know like what is actually running on there? What UI is it? It makes it very, very difficult. And so this is something that they've already gone down this road. If you look at this right here, in many ways, this can be thought of as analysis as code. If you look over this right here, it might not be familiar to you. You might be looking at this going, what's all this MP pivot stuff in here? I don't know what any of this is. And as an analyst, if I opened up a notebook and I saw this code, I'd be like, I don't know what that is. But maybe if I start looking at the output of that code, or maybe if I look a little bit closer and say, well, obviously there's an IP address in there. It's querying something with RiskIQ. Maybe the resolutions. Oh, I look at the data that's out here. Oh, I see. That looks like PDNS resolutions. And then I don't know what all this other stuff is, but maybe it looks like we're filtering some things down for a certain specific query type. And I look a little bit closer. Wow, there's some GeoIP data going on in here. That's interesting. And then we're pulling in a reputation score. And the result now is that I've got all of this data that's coming back into this context. And this to me is the value of notebooks. This is what I'm looking at here is actually a Jupyter Notebook. I know it looks like slides, but it's actually a Jupyter Notebook. And I'll jump out of it here in a moment and kind of give you that.
Mark, this is just, so as an analyst,
yes.
I'm just putting in the IP address and I get all that data below.
Absolutely. So that's exactly right. So if you were to inherit this, and I have no idea what's going on here, but I bet if I was to put in here 160.69.1.37, then, and I ran that, I bet I'd get some data. And you can just try it out and see. So it becomes very much a self-describing scenario of place that you can easily engage with. And so we really are making the case here for analysis as code as this vehicle by which we are scaling security operations. And this really does allow us to scale our analysis, or as I'm fond of calling it, more Benjamins. That's what I want. I want more Benjamins. Ideally the paper ones, but if not, I'll take some Powells as well. And the way that you do this, and this is kind of now, if you think, how do I take some of what I've learned here today and bring this into my operations? How do I make the case to my management, or if I am in a leadership role, how do I begin pulling this in? Where do I even start? Here's what I recommend. When you have an analyst, whether yourself or somebody else on your team, that has a certain analytical pathway, maybe some tools that they're using, identify the tooling that they're using. In this case, we saw that Benjamin was using URL Scan.io, and then go see if it has an API. And I went looking, and sure enough, URL Scan.io has an API. Then go see if they have a library that you can use, and if not, write one. And then create a notebook, and from there, profit. And this actually becomes something that you can do without a lot of effort. I think that I spent maybe half a day or so bringing this in. Okay, maybe a little longer because I want to make it look pretty. But basically, what we succeeded in doing was bringing URL Scan.io into Notebook. So let me get out of this cute little view here. We're back into our notebooks here. And I'm just going to kind of walk through a little bit about how this worked. And again, yes, we will share this code. It's a little bit hacky, but it's all right. We will share it. And I want to talk about kind of how that worked. So I'm bringing in a library that I created, and you can actually see some of the code here for it. And so if you got some Python programmers online, you can see a little bit about what I'm doing in here, creating just a few Python classes. And really one of the main reasons for doing this, again, this is to the Python programmers that are out there, one of the main reasons is to give me a context for this hot mess of HTML that I got going on in here. Because if you do that, then there's some really cool and magical things that will happen inside of the notebooks for you. So back into my notebook, I'm going to import that code. I did store my API creds, not really mine, Benjamin's creds, off over in a file somewhere. And I'm then instantiating this API, and I'm then performing a search. And if I do that and look at the results there, I have 2 results that came back into there. And then I'm just doing a simple for loop and saying for each of those results, then let's just display what that is. And if we do that, well, here's the outcome. So now we've got this domain. We have all of those fields, right, that came back from URL Scan.io. And there's that image that we've got. And so right off the bat, we have within the context of a notebook an understanding that something wicked this way comes. And scrolling down a little further, we have the other result right here as well. So if you think about what I did was I leveraged this context of a Jupyter Notebook, and I invested a little bit of time to take what was an established analytical pathway and bring it into this context. And this has now resulted in a notebook that I can share with others on my team. And it is, first of all, the output of this is persisted. If I don't clear the output of this and I share it with somebody, then the output's just right there. And that's one of the benefits of using notebooks. The other benefit, of course, is that this is now something that folks can easily repeat. This is, like, if you look at all this code right over here, all of this crazy output, all of this stuff to talk to their API, like, this can go a little bit mind-numbing there, right? Especially if you're not familiar with Python. But if you inherited this notebook and you look at these few lines and you're like, I have no idea what's going on, but I see a domain. And I'm pretty sure that if I put in another domain that I'm investigating, I could just drop that in there and I would get some results. And that's really how this ends up being something that applies across your team. So,
Mark, you're the,
yes.
I have to say, you're the Doc Brown of coding. He told me today, hey, Benjamin, it's not perfect. It's not this. I'm going, it's like Doc Brown from Back to the Future. He goes, I'm so upset with the model I created. It's not painted, it's not to scale, but it's exact. That's like what this is. It's like exactly what I wanted. And now combining those two together, I can have that output and then get the images from that output and then immediately know what's happening without having to do anything manually.
That's exactly right.
Hey, so Mark.
Yes, go ahead.
We do have a few questions just before we get moving
Absolutely.
on. And you were kind of touching on these, so you might have already answered both of them. But what is the best place for me to get started with Jupyter?
Certainly. So I would say the main Jupyter. Well, there's actually a few resources here that I'd suggest on this. The main site for Jupyter, which I'll look that up and bring it up in a moment. The other one, and we'll make sure to share this resource. This is probably what my preferred one would be right now. So there is a great article that was published by our colleagues at Microsoft talking about becoming a notebook ninja in here. And so that's definitely a great starting point. The post talks about what are notebooks and when do you need them. And it goes through and kind of describes the value prop of them, where they fit, what their pedigree is, where they came from, what in the wide world Jupyter stands for. So this is probably what I would say is the optimal starting point. And we'll make sure to get that out to folks there. And then for getting into some of our own the resources that we've provided, we've published a whole set of resources that I will link out to you as well. And that provides details on our library and how to bring that into this context.
That was the other question. So you answered it.
Yeah, we'll send it out when we send out the information about the workshop. We'll make sure that we forward out the link to where to download these things and all the other material.
Yep, understood. And then I think the other thing too, and I don't want to forget to send this out, so somebody please remind me about this, but there was a recent conference called, here you go, InfoSec Jupyterthon, fairly recent one. There's actually been a couple of years of it. There's this one here most recently in 2021. And this is also a great set of resources. There's a whole set of recordings from this session. It was put on by some of my colleagues at Microsoft, and this is just a great 101 start. They did an outstanding job of like, what is this? Where's the pedigree of it? How did it come from? How do you start using it? Running through the basics of it. For any of the sort of the leaders out there, the managers really looking for an understanding of how this fits strategically, I highly recommend John Lambert's session from this as well. And he is the general manager at Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center, and he did a great sort of a talk and referenced some points in his history when he first encountered notebooks, actually some years ago. And it was a really interesting way of realizing that this may be somewhat new to some of us, but it's actually an established practice within a number of very sophisticated and very advanced teams. And this really did a great job of outlining that. So that's what I'd recommend also as a great place to go through and look at that. I think I also did a talk in there, so if for some reason you want to hear more of me, which I don't know why, there's actually some of that in here too. I can't imagine. I really can't imagine.
But the biggest thing with the notebooks is that your investigation is preserved.
That's
and
exactly
all the
right.
data is there. But then if you need to refresh it, the biggest thing is when you do these investigations, when you're done, the problem is that do you go back and relook to see if there's anything new? Well, you just rerun the notebook now.
Exactly.
And it's done. So that's the part that if you document it in the notebook, you know what happened right then, but then you can always rerun it any date and time and get more information that's updated.
That's right. Many of you have likely had an encounter with the Python argparse module, and the appropriate way to pronounce that is arg, because it can be a little bit frustrating trying to figure it out. Basically, what happens is you write a little Python script and you hard code in the IP address you're doing an investigation, and then you realize, oh wait, I need to make this more generic, and that's when you discover, oh well, now I'm trying to do command line parsing and I'm trying to put in some command line parameters and all of this. That's a good indication that it's time to switch to notebooks, because the notebook provides you a far more durable context for that. And gives you a way that actually makes that something that is reusable without having to figure out how to do all of the fun bits at the command line. So briefly here, just a few things I want to reference into this. Sorry, I just got that was funny. How can someone get an internship at the Microsoft Security Department? I agree. That's a great question, actually. When you figure that out, you let me know. You can do what I'm doing, which is I'm writing some Python code and hoping that they're like, hey, come over here.
That's it. That's one quick way to get the attention.
Exactly. So anyway, so one of the things here, back into this notebook that I wanted to underscore, the other value of this is you can start merging your analytical pathways together, right? Instead of having to go off into a browser, open up a tab, then try to figure out manually how to bring that data back in, you can do that in the context of a notebook in here. And so at this part, and again, it would be a separate session really for us to kind of go deeper into how the passive total Python library works, how the analyzer works in there. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm actually taking the results that came back and I'm looking at the page IP address and I'm pulling back the summary card information. When you saw the UI that Benjamin was showing, there were numbers across all the tabs in there. That data is available programmatically. It's a great way to get a sense of where your next investigation pathway should go. And I can actually bring that directly into here. So that again is a value of a notebook. This was actually really an interesting experience we had as we were starting to roll this out and having conversations. One of our customers took one look at this and said, "Oh, I know exactly what to do with this," because internally within their security operations practice, within their threat intel analyst team, they had already created a set of internal libraries and they already had rolled out notebooks and were actually in the process of scaling up those notebooks to be able to run on an automatic basis. So at that point, they knew, oh, I got it. I know what to do. I'm just going to go ahead and bring into that framework the analyzer and the RiskIQ APIs, and now my analysts can just extend what they're doing and add it in directly to their existing flow. So again, that's one of the benefits of bringing it here into this perspective. So again, we linked out to a couple of the resources there. I know that we're really just sort of glazing over the very top level of what the analyzer is and how notebooks work. And so again, take a look at those resources as getting started. And I do think that I will be unsuccessful in my efforts to avoid Benjamin's ongoing pleas to have just kind of a dedicated session just for Notebooks 101. So I think that's probably where this is kind of coming around to. I did want to go ahead.
You know, we are coming up on on that point very quickly. Plus, Mark is from Seattle, so he needs his coffee. Show of hands, real quick. Who would be up for that? Just rough straw poll here. A session fully dedicated to just how to with workbooks, for a couple hours. Is that something that's of interest to the folks here on this workshop?
Got one hand.
Just kind of so we'll count those up, and you just can click the little raise hand button. That's all you have to do. And so we can then count those up and say, okay, these are the people that raise their hand when asked. And so we can say, okay, is there something here that might be worth putting together?
Yeah, we got over 20 people at least.
And given that you're all paying attention now to Mark drinking coffee and questions such as these, Barrett, do we have a winner to announce for that? What is it? It's an Amex gift card, right?
Yes, we do. I'll speak for Barrett.
Okay.
It's Cheryl H. If you're still on, we will contact you after this workshop.
Cheryl H. Okay. Yeah, but just wanted to like kind of quickly to the group here, one, tell you who won that thing. And then secondly, just understand who's up for such a specialized workshop like that. Plus, Mark, you needed some coffee and a chance to take a breath there. But go on.
So we have one more piece. So Mark has one more.
Yeah, let me go ahead and show you just one little bit here. And this is really kind of gets to the practical element of this. And some folks had actually asked some of this, they brought this up in the chat in there. It's like, this is nice, but how do I get this into a sim? There's a few different vectors that I can see for this, some of which we could do programmatically, some of which we may just set up directly in analytics rules. So as an example, I'm here in Microsoft Sentinel. You could imagine this scenario working out in your own sim as well. And I have a set of incidents here that have been surfaced, and you see there's a couple in here called leverage domains. If I click on those and take a look, and then I look at some of the details on them, then we can see that we have some entities coming into here. If we look over onto the entities, they're kind of displayed a little bit weird in here, but trust me, the entire domain is there. And the thing that's interesting here is if you look at the analytics rule, leverage domains, I'm going to click on that. That's going to take me to this very rudimentary but still pretty effective view that I have of that particular space that we were looking at. So we were looking at, if you remember in there, the DigitalOcean spaces as being one of the things that were of interest in here. Let me widen up my time frame here, last 4 hours, and then I'll just go ahead and show you kind of what that results in. Now, again, the DigitalOcean spaces, if you remember, we had found through our investigation some of these phish kits that were either setting up and hosting their resources on DigitalOcean spaces or pulling resources from sites that were hosted on there. So this now becomes something that we are interested in searching, and there's a few different ways we can do that. And of course, one of them might be into our DNS logs. So if we were to go searching in our DNS logs, we might actually find some DNS resolutions for that. And just to kind of give you a full circle perspective of how that is, I have here just a standard Windows server, and I've configured it to be a DNS server, and that DNS server is feeding its data into the DNS events into Sentinel. And here, and this of course is a very contrived example because I'm just typing the domains in and resolving them locally against the host here in PowerShell. In practice, it'd be your CFO clicking on these links going, hey, I'll approve an invoice, hey, I'll approve an invoice, right? So that's how it would really work. But even once they were to click on those things, or if they were simply to load a page and it was to then pull in resources from a bunch of spots, those domains would need to get resolved, and hopefully you are configured in such a way that your DNS logs are coming back into your SIM, and that gives you a place for you to begin taking some of the outcome of your investigations that Benjamin was doing and actually go searching, and even then getting to the point where you're actually writing analytics rules. And so that's how that incident actually got created in here. It was because I created this analytics rule pretty rudimentary, but also extremely targeted. And that's one of the values of creating your own threat intelligence, is you end up with some highly, highly targeted intel. And then, of course, from there, when the data does come in, we actually have the option of running some playbooks on that. So if I go and take a look at some of the playbooks that are in here, now again, playbooks, notebooks, workbooks, you got to keep these things a little bit separate. I know it's easy to conflate them. I get it confused all the time. A playbook in here is really the Sentinel component of orchestration and automation. It's leveraging a set of logic apps bundled together as a solution that we publish out in the Sentinel Content Hub. And you can see there's a whole list of these playbooks here that I can execute directly on that incident that has that data in there. And of course, each of these would have various actions that it would go through. In the case of the automated triage one, it would actually adjust the priority of the incident that I'm looking at, if based on the reputation score that's coming in. And that, again, gives you an additional way of refining the data that's coming. So if you are finding that maybe just that basic investigation is surfacing maybe a few too many alerts, too many responses, and you need a tool to kind of narrow that down, you could actually maybe even configure your playbooks to run in kind of an automated sense. And so that way, every time something came in, say with a domain or something else, you can say, you know what, just go ahead and after running these other things, we want another level of refinement on there. Let's go ahead and run that automated triage, maybe one of our summary data sets in there. And again, I'm running it here on an ad hoc basis, but that could easily be configured to run directly in a programmatic sense. So Benjamin, does that cover, oh, and here, by the way, let me show you this real quick, right? Here's the results that came back from that. We have that domain that we were searching on. There's the classification, and now we have the actual data in there. So there's really what we've done here is we've shown about 3 different places, right, where this scoring has come into our investigative context. It's come into the UI, which is where we began with it. It came into notebooks, where Benjamin was doing that, and then also came into some notebooks that I was working on adjacent to the intelligence from an external source, and then now finally we're all the way into an incident, and we're seeing it here. That to me is really what we want to strive for, is this scenario where we are placing this intelligence adjacent to wherever it is that the investigation is taking place. Sometimes folks, typically the kind of like threat actor mapping and the things we're doing here are maybe not something that somebody at like an initial frontline defender reviewing incidents in there, they would maybe not be going down those rabbit trails that a lot of us are maybe going down on a daily basis. But there are some ways to take the benefits of that and the outcomes of that and bring it into their context. And this risk score enabled by this playbook is one way to do that. Those notebooks also become a way as well. There's actually a built into Microsoft Sentinel. One of the other capabilities you see over here is notebooks. These are actually the Jupyter Notebook scenario enabled directly in the context of Azure Sentinel, and you even have the ability to run these on a regular basis and incorporate them in as part of an end-to-end flow. If you haven't had a chance, if you are a Sentinel customer, do go in here and take a look at these templates, especially some of the ones that talk about a tour of the CyberSec notebook features. You'll learn a lot about the Python library that Microsoft has created to enable this, called Mystic Pi. And we actually have our data sets integrated directly into that library. And so that is another way for you to begin leveraging the RiskIQ data in a notebook context and even here inside of a SIM.
Mark,
Benjamin, anything else there that I need to cover on that, or other items that you think we should call out?
We're all good. So if we can, if I'll take over and I'll show my slides one last time, and then we'll continue. Okay, so one thing is, if you would like to kick off your own trial, if you go and you sign up for RiskIQ, you can activate a 30-day trial to do everything that we're doing inside the UI. You have API access, and if you use your own corporate email, we'll create a view of your external attack surface of what we know about your organization to see that full context and see what vulnerabilities you might have, what issues, and then be able to compare that to threat intelligence articles and things where they might overlap as well when you do your searching.
And that'll just automatically happen?
That will automatically happen, yes. Yeah. So one of the things that came up, there was a question that said, hey, is there inside of RiskIQ Illuminate, is there a possibility of getting a visualization of the DNS paths? No. You would have to examine the document object model to see that, and the DNS results from your DNS server to see that. We don't have that information. We know the results of the DNS. We know the name servers, things like that, but we're not seeing the traffic for that to know that if it was a redirect or this was happening or that was happening. So we're taking care of that one live. So someone asked about malware on the phone. So we don't do any analysis on the malware on the phone, but we do bring down all of the APKs around the world from all the different places, and we sandbox them. We know what happens. We know what malware is associated with that. So you can go back and look at some workshops did last year where we talked about malware for phones and some of the information that we have and how we're able to do that. I think we did something around election time a year and a half ago where we focused on some apps that were being leveraged for the elections, and some that good and some bad, and what was happening. Okay. Anything else that we need to talk about? Any other questions coming in through the chat? Okay.
I think that's a bit of a whirlwind of fun.
Yeah, I hope everyone had a great time today, and we try to do these to make them real life and explain, what we're doing. So the big takeaway is, don't get discouraged when you see a lot of results that show up. I'm not even showing my screen right now. So hold on, I forgot to show my screen. So give me a quick second.
And I was going to say, Barrett, at some point, can you let everybody know what they'll be receiving post workshop if you're on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be following up tomorrow with the link to today's recording and presentation. And then everyone will also in that email be receiving a link to their CPE certificate. So be on the lookout.
Perfect. So let us know of any other topics you might want us to address in future workshops. We really look at the community and try to create use cases that you might want to see. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad you're here. Go get them, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.